Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Amita Rari, and coming up in today's newscast, mass protests continuing all around the country with leaders calling to pause judicial reform, hearing calls for unity. Meantime, the Fitch ratings agency having the full predictions for Israel's credit rating in light of the current political events. And Unicorn is almost here. A short snippet of Israel's Eurovision Song Contest entry is out, and we'll get you dancing. A group of 4 coalition and opposition Knesset members have issued a joint call to pause judicial reform and allow for a non-partisan consensus dialogue hosted by President Herzog. The lawmakers issued their plea as a mass protest against the government-planned judicial reform intensify. President Herzog reissued his plea for dialogue while Netanyahu condemned the protesters. ILTV's Steve Leibovich reports.
The call from Likud's Yuli Edelstein and Dani Danon and National Union Party's Gadi Eisenkot and Chili Trooper came at the end of the most raucous day yet in the mass protests and civil disobedience throughout the country, in opposition to the government's planned judicial overhaul. The joint statement said public and elected representatives have an obligation to act immediately to end the disputes and reach an agreement, and above all to stop the danger of disintegration that lies before us as a society and a country. The bipartisan MKs called on government and opposition representatives to answer Herzog's invitation and to engage with him in talks based on the outline the president proposed, which includes the suspension of any advancement of the reform until a consensus agreement is reached. The Netanyahu government, including Justice Minister Levine, have repeatedly declared openness to consensus talks, but only alongside the steady advancement of far-reaching reform. National Union Party head Benny Gantz spoke with Netanyahu and with Knesset Speaker Amir Ohana and asked them to halt the advancement of the judicial reform and to go with him to Herzog's office to hold consensus talks. Netanyahu reportedly told Gantz that his door is always open to dialogue. The Prime Minister was less cordial toward the protests in the streets, which he compared to the Jewish vigilantes in Huwara.
אנחנו לא יכולים לקבל אלימות, אנחנו לא יכולים לקבל הכאת שוטרים, אנחנו לא יכולים לקבל חסימת כבישים, אנחנו לא יכולים לקבל איומים על אנשי ציבור ועל בני משפחותיהם, דבר שקורה ממש ברגעים אלה, בליבה של תל אביב. אנחנו לא נקבל פרימת חוקים ואלימות, לא בחווארה, לא בתל אביב, לא בשום מקום.
For his part, President Herzog reissued his call for non-partisan consensus talks, saying that Israel is in a difficult time of a deep and severe internal crisis that threatens us all.
לא אתן למדינת ישראל שלנו, של כולנו, להגיע אל נקודת האל-חזור. לא אתן לאסון ההיסטורי הזה להתרחש. לעולם לא אוותר על אף חלק בחברה הישראלית, וגם לא על הסיכוי להגיע להסכמה רחבה.
Prime Minister Netanyahu has yet to respond directly to the president's new appeal.
As anti-judicial reform protests were ongoing last night, the Prime Minister's wife, Sarah Netanyahu, found herself trapped inside a hair salon in Tel Aviv, surrounded by anti-government protesters. Police were called in and she was extracted after a 2-hour confinement. ILTV's William Sharon reports.
Police were called into the rescue of the Prime Minister's wife, but Sarah remained stuck inside before the police could safely extract her. The location was Keikar Medina in central Tel Aviv, which has experienced its most serious clashes yesterday between the police and the protesters since the start of the mass demonstrations 2 months ago. Protesters crowded closely to the entrance of the hair salon, chanting, "The country is burning while Sarah's getting a haircut." The Prime Minister's wife was eventually led outside to a waiting vehicle. Back in Jerusalem, thousands of protesters were at Netanyahu's official residence. There was an extremely heavy police presence, and there were no reports of clashes with peaceful protesters. During yesterday's National Day of Disruption, declared by the organizers of the protest, many thousands of flag-waving Israeli citizens blocked roads, disrupted trains, and marched in cities across the country. Almost all the protests were peaceful. However, 22 people were detained by police at various protests around the central region. The most serious clashes were in Tel Aviv. Senior police officers reportedly complained that excessive force was used during its effort to keep the Ayalon highway open. Stun grenades were used, and a number of peaceful protesters not clashing with the police were injured.
And now joining us after the comments coming from the politicians in latest protest is Israeli journalist, attorney, and author Ben-Dror Yamini. Ben-Dror, so we have now a bipartisan group of coalition and opposition MKs calling for a pause in judicial reform to allow a break for consensus dialogue. Does it seem likely, and what's really about to happen now?
First of all, I'm not a prophet. I don't know what is going to happen, but I do know that this initiative that is coming from both sides, coalition and opposition, is the most positive move, actually, speaking about what is happening in the last 3-4 weeks. Because unfortunately, so many politicians live in a bubble, and I'm speaking about both sides. Many times they say, yes, we need a compromise from one hand, but from the other hand, they blame each other. It's not a blame game. We are speaking about the state. We are speaking about national interest, and they are playing like who should be blamed. I mean, this is not the way to solve the problem. Come on. We are expecting you to do much more. Now, the question is not anymore, do we need this kind of reform or do we not need? We need a reform. Not the one that was presented maybe by Yariv Levin, but this is not the question anymore. The question is, why do you keep on with this kind of being so stubborn? I hope it's going to change. I hope. And you know what? This time I will tell you, I pray that it will change.
Interesting opinion right here. Now, we see that President Herzog reissued his appeal for calm, and in truly dire terms, he is describing deep fractures being caused to Israeli society. Is he overstating the crisis, you think?
No, he is not. But we have to pay attention to something. It's not between people. Yes, we have demonstrators, we have people who support the reform, but it's not the point. The point is that the big division is between politicians. It's not that people are fighting in the streets. It's not that we cannot speak one to the other. I mean, if you will make a poll, and there are many polls from the last months, most people in Israel, they want a compromise. We know exactly what the public opinion is. The people strive for a compromise. It's all the blame now. In the blame game, it's not between one side to the other side. It's not between left and right. It's between the public opinion and the politicians.
Still something
and I'm blaming the politicians.
Yes, and now still something we're seeing yesterday night. The Prime Minister's wife, Sarah Netanyahu, was stuck inside a hair salon for a few hours before police could extract her. There were clashes with police and some arrests with growing civil disobedience causing road and train closures. Are some of the protesters going too far, or do you see it as like peaceful protests? What's happening?
Well, when we are speaking about the protest and when we are speaking about demonstrations and the demonstrators, we are not speaking about one group of people. We know what's happening because the protest became something that so many groups participate. So actually, yes, there are some radical groups among the demonstrators. I mean, you cannot blame the whole protest because of some extremists. There are extremists in every group, in every side of the political map. We know it.